Well, I'm going to welcome all of you. I'm Carolyn Key, and my husband was, if I knew Key, he loved this store so much. He bought it 15 years ago and passed away a little over 2 years ago. But me and my 4 children are now responsible for it, and we're so happy to have James and Fiona helping. James is the manager, and Fiona is the helper. I mean, here it is. We're really happy to have so many wonderful poets here tonight. So welcome to you, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. And welcome to those on Zoom.
It's wonderful to be here. This is the first time I've been on the school since these Our first reader tonight is Martin Edmunds, who will be reading from Flame in a Stable, one of the beautiful books from Oscar Melnichuk's Arrowsmith Press. Well, I've known Stuart for 30 years and Tom for half my life. Introducing them is kind of like introducing my older brother Stuart and cousin Tommy. Martin is a new poet to me, and everywhere I turn in his book I find energy, and I'm looking forward to hearing him read from it and getting to know his work more. So welcome, Martin.
Thank you. And thank you to Grolier for being here and all of you to show up tonight, new on Zoom. It's a pleasure to read for you. I'm going to see if I can read from the book, but it may be easier with this 42 point. So the first poem in the book owes something to the isolation of COVID.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah. So I was saying, is this any better?
Yes.
Much better.
Yes.
The first poem in the book owes something to the isolation of COVID. There was one term in it, fern flesh, refers to the ferning pattern or Lichtenberg figure of suffered by victims of a lightning strike. I think that's the only thing that needs any kind of loss. Blocked. Tight as a bolt in a priest hole, hammered sidewise in. No room for the rumored soul, stitched into the prison of your skin. Whose moon face bobs wobbling up, rising through silvery fathoms, till plump lips bump the glassy skin of the meniscus, mouthing your name while you freeze on the brink in a lather. No one could be further from the truth of you. Is it him who hit the mute on your remote, who thumbs the fader till your screen goes dim? Is he your future haint, or his parasitic twin? Unkindest cut, that wit's corrosive supplement, rubbed rawly in. Nothing new for 20 centuries. Last year's palm is still this year's ash. Ledig-Rowohlt. Fog gropes onshore like clockwork, swaddles St. Aidan's bells in fleece by 3 p.m. Now comes the blind shearer through the mirror. What has he done with your razor? You're the reek of spraints in the holt. He's fern flesh hiding in a lightning bolt. A pen would be heaven. No pencil stub, no chalk, no knuckle of peeled keel, no scrap, no scratch, no parchment paper left after buttering their slits and tucking the gutted trout in the oven. How to get word out past that armed guard who kneels to Thrawn insomniac gods and is wearing a mask of your face into his flesh. 20 centuries in, blood chooses thorns to scribble its petitions on the skin. And this next one's also set off by COVID. It's going to be the last one like that I'll read. The 2020th year of our Lord. Probably familiar with it. Hart Island has provided New York City its potter's field since, I think, 1869. And was pressed into service, especially during the early chaotic stages of COVID. Sometimes it was just for temporary burial. So the 2020th year of our Lord. Your shepherd counts our heads and hooks his flock one by one to the lich gate. Reapers harvest shards of flint and slate. No time to catch our breath or punch the clock. Goodbye, green side of the earth. Good night, daylight. A flick of the aspergillum and it's done. The cup of nuclear winter for one, followed by a main of perpetual night. But who can tell us if Catullus was right? Does our sullen sun set once forever? Or do our spirits live streaming Godward, mustard seeds that pass St. Peter's sieve, but fail his riddle, and souls' fates to be hopped in the bonfire for eternity? Your death-spreading shockwaves buffet the sun, cousin, as your final knell is rung, colliding with the sirens in my head. They strike against my temples, tilt St. John's steeple level with the roof. The swinging bell mouth lifts the sea's rim with it. From Throg's Neck past Belterre to Pocatuck, it tips the salt waves from Long Island Sound, scrapes a basin for these tears I'm weeping now. Would the dark god loosen your tongue, cousin? Could I pour libations on your common grave, excavated by a cat D4? Are his arms gentler than that rough god's who bore your wife from you when they rolled your stretcher through the bedroom door? Forgive us, cousin. Rain ticks a real-time readout of the seconds you have left behind, stranded in the hallway, by the window looking on the middle of Hell's Kitchen, yet a stone's throw from Hart Island's rocky shore. Many who love you are gathered in one room, courtesy of Zoom. Lit wicks of lilies flicker, vigil candles mantle, white wings against the backward smudge of gloom. A gust of light. Rosa holds a wedding photo. You, my God, Tony, golden. What were we, 24? Your face flares and dims and lives on air. Fuck tears. Toss salt. I'll meet you there. This is the DTs. So in this one poem, Robert's Rules refers to Chief Justice John Roberts. And there's an epigraph from Montale from Syria, which is a sublime poem put to very less than sublime uses here. But in that poem, Montale talks about finding his voice again, but it also starts out as a car trip. And the epigraph is that part of the poem. The car broke down, and an arrow of blood on a boulder pointed the way to Aleppo. Global warming. It's the dog days, Eugenio. Ratchet the heat. We've closed down the Coliseum. Can't sell a seat with white cops offering black teens for free in the street. National Pork Board stuffs House Caucus? Sweet. Play chicken with the Senate, the other white meat, on cruise control. Rock the swamp. Swipe right. Swipe left. Repeat. Jack a Hamilton strap due 2 to 4. Pay tax on millions? What's the bottom 99% for? Trickle-down's pigeon for piss on the poor. Money doesn't talk, it purrs. Too small to save, too big to fail. The huckster-in-chief himself is up for sale. Our one and only second chance at the third rail. Perjury trap, witch hunt, our democracy's cursed. What swamp thing starts to life now her waters have burst? Kool-Aid press? Citizens benighted, Robert's rules, you first. Which of us hasn't led a blameless life? We're hacking and fracking and vacking and liking our life on Facebook. We follow on Twitter, we kindle, and Tinder the wife. I am a saint for sinning, the bishop of hippos wallowing in it, killing the competition, lighting them up with my Zippo. I find your arrow of blood on a boulder, pointing the way to Aleppo. Go, little soul, my body's host and guest. The globe is bleeding refugees. The West is stitching Kevlar to its Sunday best. Perfect match for red. Me, dry point lover. Your brush, loaded with color. Me, rustic trudging through mud from cattail to canebrake. Hayfoot, strawfoot, hayfoot, straw. Willing and able. And you, my vixen, you pour through grassland like whiskey over ice. Cool but kind, kind but not nice. A real dame raised you to be neither grateful nor ungrateful. Giddy, brilliant, safe, as a flame in a stable. This is Tetragrammaton. The title refers to the 4 Hebrew letters, the consonants of God's name, which we pronounce as Yahweh or Jehovah, in violation of the biblical prohibition against speaking or writing the full name of God. Tetragrammaton. His horse is scorpion, and his prose is buried in the dresser, under keys and coins and clothes. Who is his lover? Who is his confessor? Ask the waves, ask the sheaves, ask the winds, ask the darkness between stars. His pride brightens daybreak, and his sins are written on the petals of the rose. Light is whose seed? Glaciers calve in whose wake? Who chummed blood from the ocean, stitched it veins, and set the tiger pacing in its cell? Made Ant a dragon in a world of grains. His presence is splendor, his absence deafens hell. And since the arc of the stallion's neck is the sign of his triumph, grass is his mercy, dew shines his magnificence. His lowliest creatures go clothed in the rainbow, the greater scaled or skinned, alive to please us. Look how his anger makes the peacock watch its back. His laughter chills the rain that imitates it. Silence is the last and greatest of his canticles. Now this Petra, the title of the poem is Petra, it's the ancient Nabatean city in Jordan. I was working on a feature adaptation of Balzac's story, A Passion in the Desert. We were staying in Wadi Rum nearby Wadi Musa. And there was a young Bedou couple, shepherdess with a newborn. I think the baby was about a week old. They were coming back from distant Graceland to their home among the ruins in an abandoned cave. And so the very few things they had tended to have 2 of whatever they had. So 2 straw pallets, 2 plates, 2 painted fading glasses for tea, 1 panpipe, 1 framed drum, a circle of stones for the fire. And they invited into their home for food and drink and music the whole film crew. There were 18 of us, so you guessed it, 2 of us at a time. So it was a hard life, clearly, but to my eyes, to steal a phrase, it was a life reduced to riches. Petra, probably a lot of you have been there, but it's just saturated with the sense of those sandstone facades crumbling back into grains of time as you walk through the narrow sea, you can see the river of sky over your head or a band of stars. And so it opens up into the citadel that's totally exposed to the stars and the wind. And I think about that Rumi couplet of, so everyone wants to bring me something. Show me someone who can take something away. So this is my thanksgiving to the spirit of the place and that the generosity of that scouring that you feel there. It's spoken in the voice of Petra itself, and this is dedicated to Lavinia Currier. Petra. My laughter is the crackle of kindling at midnight, the moon, my white goat caught on a thorn. You are a man on his knees peeking through a keyhole when the door is open. Heaven is my tent roof, hung by a rope from the sky. Sleep with me. I am sweet tea. I am these red seeds on a white plate. Don't let your heart be a bird that starves with food in its cage. Is there some water there? African funeral, Anjou. Match flames in the cattails mating red throat set the meadow smoking through thatched straw and fog. Gashed embers, crush of feathers, deathbed hush and wish, rushlight guttering on the threshold, rustler of dovecotes, kestrel, abacua seer, Dita king, in your tie-dyed raffia suit of autumnal colors, cinnamon, clove, gold, your black magic witch doctor leopard skin vest and gorget, roadkill hawk, hooked beak smashed flatter than an arrowhead on the macadam of violet below the river, and a row of plane trees standing guard in Maghreb desert camo. Your crushed skull, that egg, that O, that zero, where nothing said what it meant, through my open mouth, death's open eye. This is Metamorphosis. Bombyx mori is the scientific name of the domesticated silk moth. The larval stages or instars feed on the leaves of the mulberry. Metamorphosis. If I've been rough-handed with my life, who knows what silk may yet be made of me? Let my reeds green again, sedge's feather star-tipped under a celestial dew. Grant me a hand in the great mystery, holy roller scarab shoving my dung-ball sun under the infinite arch of sky. I'll navigate by the Milky Way, that all might fructify. Or may I be a pismire participant in the dark art of Mormacacori, ant dispersal of seeds. Every sentence I write ends in a period, or exclamation point, or question mark, right? Those ink dots common to all three, same size as the eggs you lay, Bombyx moratorite salutamus, soft mouth, silk moth, we who are about to die salute you. Bombyx, bind me as a pupa to your truth. Teach me faith in my fifth instar, my phoenix exit into something strange. And you, shadowy one, leaning into the light, hurtling from the future to our meeting on the page, set this book down partway open on the four edges of its boards, spine the ridgeline of my A-frame paper wasp enclave, this tent of words. Spin my lines out to a tensile filament, speak them into a tissue of sound. This is my chrysalis, my papyrus cocoon, gauze dipped in the heart salts, like the mantle of a hurricane lamp. Shall I blaze and consume myself with the dark I include? I used to tell the toughs among my Waltham friends, see you in hell or Haverhill before this night. That day comes closer when whatever death is mine starts showing and is brought full term. I've been rough-handed with my life, torching draft after draft of it for light to write you by. Caught in the halo of that follow spot, dancer on the edge of existence and non-existence, all the alchemy has to be yours. You're the mage, Merlin Falcon, kingmaker, sage. I'm the volunteer assistant tripping on the steps to the stage. Paging through these poems, reader, gentling my blood with your touch, don't close the book on me. Turn its leaves, mulberry, feast for the silkmaker worm. So, I guess 2 short poems to end with. This is Waking. Shaken from a dream of youth whose lost love goes barefoot on hot top through brambles, clothes her beauty in the wreckage of the rose. And this one is not in the book. It's starseed, sunburst, dewdrop, whole one. You who are in us, the moment and locus of arrival at the wellspring, eternal homecoming, constantly promised, no sooner tasted than again deferred. I want to surrender, but what can I give you that isn't already yours? Take these grains of red earth, let them stand for the ants, for the hours, for the rain, for the road.
Just feel so lucky to have gotten to hear that. Fabulous. Stuart Dischell is back in town, not too far from the Lennane Street building that inspired some of the poems about people living in apartments in his first book, Good Hope Road. Stuart's books are all stylish, witty, moving. He's a poet who writes about love and relationships gone wrong, about people, heartache, joy, parents in the backyard and in hotel rooms in New York, specificity about Paris, the Jersey Shore. Back in Greensboro in the early 90s, I was one of Stuart's first students in the MFA program at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I was in fact his teaching assistant for an introduction to poetry class. I'll never forget his syllabus. Right below his contact information, office address, rotary phone number, and no email, he dropped in a poem by Bill Knott, the juggler to his audience. One in my hand, one in the air, and one in you. That's Stuart. Who else has a motto for his syllabus? Elegant, graceful, never overdone. Even when he writes a big poem like Days of Me. Dischell poems are painterly and cinematic. Movies that feel improvisational and beautifully clear. But don't let that fool you. His poems show us how we construct ourselves and our affections with language and images of ourselves and others. An imaginative spirit that is also an investigative spirit. The world of poetry is very different than it was in the early 90s. It is more businesslike, professional, self-consciously public. Now practically an NPR show, American poetry has always had a lot of camps. but there is something pleasingly, even defiantly, under the radar about the poetry of Stuart Dischell, about how great his last few books have been, with their utter lack of pretension being one with their subtle artistry and closer to the actual lived feelings that make life worthwhile than anybody else's poetry I can think of now. When I say this, I'm thinking of the short poems in Standing on Z and Children with Enemies, and his new book, The Lookout Man. Welcome back, Stuart.
Wow, David. As former student, friend, and fellow poet, you make this all worth it. Thank you so much, really. And thank you, Marty, for the very powerful reading. And while I'm emoting, thank you, James, for setting this up. And thank you, Effiani, for being so generous and kind to me when I first came to Boston. And thank you so much, Louisa, who was inordinately kind to me, coming in here, being very depressed as a young poet and not knowing, and her telling me, oh, one day, Stuart, you'll have books out and you'll come here to read, and it's going to happen. And Louise even let me watch the store when she went out for coffee, which was a great rarity that she,
Fired me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of emoting to do. There's 3 people in the audience who I've known for 50 years, even though I haven't been born yet. I look around and so many great friends here tonight, and I hope you're still my friends after the reading. First poem I'm going to read is called Lines About the Snow. The first snow fell before the first word. No name could be given for it or rain, or wind, or fields with their winter colors. No name for cold, or clouds, or sun, or even the sky. But snow was different. Once it fell, it appeared to stay forever. And the nameless world was cold for a long time, until the melting brought the creatures from deep in caves into the light. Once silent, I feared them, and screamed the first word. Tiger! According to Julian Jaynes, lines of evolutionary progress. Creatures of the earth, we gazed upon the sky. We straightened up and grew taller. No more thistles in the palm or knuckles in the dirt. We liked the taste of meat, and it made our brains and bodies strong. Some of us trapped the herds in canyons. Some of us ran them off the cliffs. Some of us drew their deeds in caves and lit our walls with rendered fat. I don't want to stand up. I want to lie here in a lawn chair and pretend I am back at the Tahiti bar in Saint-Tropez, where rich people go naked in the sunshine. Lines about mountains. I just learned that mountains kill more people climbing down them than making their brave ascent, and that some have the oldest rocks on the earth. Small wonder they crumble into avalanche, having weathered eons to fall. Mountains must get tired with so many people climbing them, and bored with the endless boot prints of alpinists in bright garb. The flagpoles jammed into crags, piton and foothold, the kick of the crampon, metal ladders across crevasses. More climbers die each summer on Mont Blanc than all the Himalayas, its summit not as perilous but more frequented than Everest or K2. I conclude the nearer mountain is far more dangerous than the distant one, just as we are more likely to be killed by the hands of someone we love. I'm getting elemental here. Lines about rivers, then the sea. don't like to swim in rivers. Their lengths and bends trouble me. If my chest touched against river weeds, I would panic. No, I don't like to swim in rivers, but I admire them for being relentless. Even blind rivers buried under cities, or rivers that run just a few days a year. Some rivers create borders between states and nations. Some rivers stray from their courses or are dammed from flowing to neighbors. I very much like the word estuary and the thought of boats at low tide there. And I appreciate how a river divides Pest from Buda, Minneapolis from St. Paul, where the banks someone decided were left and right. A current is like a river in the sea. When I was small, I lived along the beach. When I got caught in a riptide, a passing wave brought me home. Lines about the wind. All fuss and bluster, the wind is busy. It has a long way to go, across the wide seas in one long breath, clearing its throat down the avenues of commerce. The wind is master of the clouds, sends scraps and dust along the highways. The wind can be fresh, and the wind can be ill. Everyone has mixed feelings about the wind. The Scirocco, the Santa Ana, the Mistral, which sounds like mistress and minstrel. They all make you crazy. You can blame the wind when you hate your job or beat your kids, go off with your colleague for a dirty weekend. But no one likes it when the wind quits and stops the chimes in the park and stalls the sailboats in the public fountains, and the blades cease spinning on the prairie, and gutter leaves halt running toward erosion, and no breeze lifts the horse's tail or dries the sweat on the baby's neck. The letter carrier left his little truck open. The wind is blowing away my debts. This little poem here is for our friend Lucy Brock-Broido. It's not an elegy, and the only reason it's really for her is because I think she might have appreciated if you think it's humor, the humor in this poem. Made me think about. Lines in the backyard. Have you seen the lights in the windows of the trees? No one is at home there unless you count what's wild. Do you know the names of everyone asleep in your leaves? I'm not just talking about genus and species. It's hard work keeping up with the new ones or those passing through the yard for the night. Once I saw an owl perched on a low-limbed tree. I never did get its name because it took off soon. Jake the vole rode its talons to the stars. He never came back, but a new Jake lives here now. Meeting my parents for a weekend in New York, 1988. My father drowned in this water, my mother said, holding a glass filled from the tap, meaning it ran through the pipes all the way from the reservoir where he was pulled under receding waters after hunting wild parakeets with her brothers. The cloudy water took a long time to clear in her hand. She stared into the glass as if through the windows of public institutions where she stood in lines with her mother before the New Deal when the neighbors made a rent party to hold off their eviction. After the bubbles and the water settled, she took a deep drink and left a smudge of lipstick on the rim. And I, by the window, looked away at the horses in the park, declining the rest of the glass she offered, while my father, out of habit, checked the mattresses for bed bugs. By the way, the Communist Party made that rent party for my grandmother after my grandfather died and was able to raise money to keep them in their apartment. So in the 1930s, as you probably know, there were no social safety nets. This is a bit longer. Inside the statue, through the heel and ankle, I enter from the right, the way one enters a cathedral. Climbing the narrow stairs, I feel the pressure in my own shins, ascending to the tibia, to the femur. Those ahead rest on the landing at the knee. From where I begin, spiraling to the buckle, where the up and down flights meet just below the navel. Someone has opened a tavern here. A bald owner brews coffee and pours the drinks, and two pale daughters serve them on trays. They are the color white people get when living in a mine. But they are not in a mine. Fluorescent tubes light them. I ask for water, and they point at bottled water in the cooler. They are without speech. The statue is wired for electricity, but there is no plumbing inside the statue. A sign in the foyer explains all this, where a sleepy docent balances awake before a model of the statue. My mind is everywhere. I recollect the windy streets of the capital where I had been walking past the embassies just yesterday. The leaves ran ahead of us. My dog was ready to follow. Did I say it was a big dog? It dragged me by the leash into the park, where the leaves assembled on the lawn, crisp as you would expect in this season, underfoot in all directions. I remember passing through the gates. I am in the torso near the seventh rib, taking the zigzag flights underfoot through the great cavity of chest, where the ribs, like sideways flying buttresses, suggest the inside of a whale's mouth. As I ascend to the clavicle, then rung up by a ladder through the long, noble throat to the windswept observation deck, where I gaze through the eyes open to the elements above the buildings and treetops. Pine or cedar means nothing to the statue. Gold or rust, it's all the same. The statue cares nothing for the line outside the ticket counter or the women waiting on the benches below for their children to come down, or the boys selling souvenirs of the statue displayed on a table by the left foot. Before climbing the statue, I was a citizen like anyone. Everything was large to me. Then the wheel of the years rode me to this moment. I should have seen it, but I looked elsewhere. There are smaller statues in the world. You think you are in armor. Some, when you enter, you cannot move at all. I drop a coin into the scenic viewer. Men idle outside a liquor store. Couples walk a path along the river. Smoke rises from the chimney pots of the tile-roofed houses. The uniformed driver with her empty bus checks her tires with a gauge she took from her shirt pocket. The letter carrier in his truck reads a magazine. The merchant sailors on the vessels watch the dock workers warehouse the cargo. The statue does not care about deeds or commerce. The statue does not see the lives in progress. If someone harmed you, the statue would do nothing. The statue looks through and over and beyond. The statue is not aware, some call it the statue, or that its image is well known. I listen through the wire mesh of each ear while the statue hears nothing. The wind blows through its hollow brain. Even pigeons do not roost in its folds. To stand before the brow of the statue and see out its eyes is to understand what is meant by distance and be embarrassed by all personal thoughts. The statue has no self, therefore no self-pity. If I have a name, I cannot remember it now. The last poem I'll read is called Window Peeping into the Garden of Eden. poem is for the poet Linda Gregg, who's also passed to the other world. And this poem is for her because Linda always had this talent of trying to push your buttons in order to get the conversation to continue. Like, you know, how did you really feel about your father? How did you really feel about your last breakup? Were you really hurt by that? This poem is window peeping into the Garden of Eden. Like Adam and Eve in the backyard, my parents on the lawn furniture were having at each other on a warm day on the paths under the cover of a high fence that kept out the watching eyes of neighbors, but not their son cutting school, looking out the kitchen window to see her riding him among the roses and geraniums. I had gone to the refrigerator and was washing blueberries in the sink. After they pulled on their bathing suits, I stepped out into the garden. What could I do but offer them fruit?
Tom Sleigh is back in town too. Tom lived here for many years, so it's a shock to realize he probably has been in New York, where he teaches at Hunter College and lives in Brooklyn, longer than he lived here. Always a poet you would want to write like if you could. A poet whose lines you had to love, who could link chains of experience together, and like his friends, Alan Shapiro and David Ferry, he could tell the hard and complicated emotional truth about any situation. And like other Cambridge poets like Pinsky and Bedart and Gail Mazer and Lloyd, draw on with no fuss the enormous resources of his personal culture, his own urbane civilization. The poem as an act of interpretation, the poet as a reader of life situations. In the years since Tom has left, he has grown more and more global. As the world has gotten crazier, more violent, more frenzied and extreme, less welcoming, hotter and meaner, and as we have gotten more mediated by screens and the smaller pods of our tribalism, Tom's books have risen to the occasion with wisdom, anger, warning, and compassion. Tom's new book, The King's Touched, is truly a book to take as a whole. The first half of it roughly draws on Tom's lived experience working as a journalist in the Middle East, I think. He takes us there to the moment and the individual people in moments in ways that we don't get from our own mediated screens or even from the best journalism. On one hand, we have this American poet, a poet of individual moments and individuals. On the other hand, we have a sense that American ways of thinking about things are not very much help for these dark times. I think that's because on one hand, we are not universal enough or specific enough about our own short-term leases on mortality. There is a certain amount of hellfire in this book. The first person plural is everybody on the planet. If you adjust your ears to the proper frequency, you can hear our bones in marked and unmarked graves talk among themselves, rehearsing cold facts about who never passed the test of standing up on two legs, who never left the savannah for the forest, who hemmed and hawed over whether God exists. Tom's contemporary, war-torn and refugee-abusing world is as drab and ambiguous in its aims as espionage. But the poetry is full of moral clarity. In the second half of the book, we find the personal poet living beyond screens. The news is better, but we still have to be tough-minded. The book really is constructed in a way that feels purposeful. Purposeful to booby-trap the ways we are all being encouraged to think, not looking around the world and seeing how we live there, and not looking inside to see where we live with others and alone. The spider weaves a web on his computer screen. What Tom is not in his poems is ever a lightweight. If I hold a copy of the book, You can see how many pages I have dog-eared in wonder for their power, humility, variety, and skill. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you. Wow. Stuart, I'm kind of speechless, but I'll get over it very quickly. It was I just want to say it's been a wonderful reading. That was a beautiful introduction. It's embarrassing to be seen clearly, and then also to know that there's a lot of generosity larded in there. So I'm deeply grateful for that. I'll just say a couple of things before I say about Martin and Stuart, a few things. But this was the first store, you know, I had my first book party here. That was, okay, I may as well say it, 40 years ago. Oof, ouch, yeah. And, Louisa was here. I once sat at the store for Louisa as well. It was a disconcerting experience. There was a lot of stock that had fallen behind the shelves, and there was a certain kind of, wonderful chaos which felt utterly, correct. And then there was always Pumpkin, who seemed as if, was friendly enough, but you never knew. And Louisa herself was, as I described my lately passed mother, a pistol, and a lovely, presence. And then Ifeanyi was such an amazing person. Whenever I was in Ifeanyi's company, which wasn't nearly enough, I felt smarter and I felt funnier, and he was smarter and funnier than I ever was. And he had such a great laugh, and there was such affection, that he had for poetry, but even that, there was a kind of, he had a wonderful sense of self-irony, and you could sit there and do one-downsmanship with him, as opposed to one-upsmanship. So I want to thank the family for keeping this place going. And James, and thank you for keeping the till. That's great. Anyway, Stuart and Marty, and then I'm going to shut up and read. I've known Marty and Stuart for many, many years. I remember meeting Stuart at a bar. Where else? And I was... Yes, exactly. And I was amazed at Stuart's capacity for literature, for drink, and I thought, even at that moment, just meeting him for an hour, that this guy had a real, he had an amazing genius for life and enjoying himself, and that life and enjoyment is everywhere in his work. He smiled. And then, Marty, I was so happy when I read Marty's work over the years, and it's very rare to find a poet who sort of takes Gerard Manley Hopkins, Robert Lowell, his own kind of bizarre, unbelievably densely woven rhetoric, and turns it into something that's so uniquely personal. And I was really, by listening to both these guys, I'm trying to use up time so I don't have to. But I really am really happy to be here with you. So anyway, I will try to live up to that introduction, but I won't. I think what I'll do is start, because I'm a slavish program maker, but I'm going to shit can the program and try to work off of your intro a bit. So you mentioned a spider, right? Poem is in two parts, and I was at my, the most important thing is the time, of course. And I was at my, sitting there staring at the screen, and I noticed this kind of odd disturbance going on in one corner of it. And I suddenly realized, oh, it's a tiny little spider. And so that kind of sparked off the poem. And this poem also picks up an experience that Osgold and I had together in Syria with a Palestinian refugee. And one thing, when the refugees were expelled in 1940, when the Palestinians were expelled in 1948, they went all over the world. But one of the things that was consistent about them was that many of them had the deeds to their house. And so one of the things that happened in this encounter was that I didn't know what was metaphorical and what was literal. And that was a very interesting, strange experience to have. So I'll start with this poem, and I'll start the clock. In which a spider weaves a web on my computer screen. 1. What is that shadow that weaves itself so fine across the edge of my computer screen? There it is, a pinprick of a spider weaving a web I'm looking through, as if it were a veil of second sight that, as I type these words behind the veil, the screen light shines right through. It weaves the sun into its web and turns the screen into a mirror, shooting back my own eyes, looking at the spider and wondering what the spider knows of me. Hello, pal, I want to say, but that feels unctuous, overly familiar for what I know I'm going to do. The web sways and ripples each time I breathe, getting ready to rip it away. There's a lot of casual brutality to reconcile. The spider clings to its web's outer rim, plucks with a slender leg a near invisible guy wire each time I type a word, and the silk trembles. 2. He said that being a refugee was like living like a spider in the bottom of a well. He held his quiet dignity close to him. The others in the room stopped talking. I won't repeat exactly what he said, since it's his to tell. But it had to do with how his mother died, how his home was destroyed. The words you use to talk about such things, the second they're uttered, sound suspect. For him to say, the soldiers shot my father, they blew up our house, and the worst thing I ever saw, the very worst, was seeing my baby brother crying on my dead mother's breast, is only my rendering in English what the translator, speaking in French, said he said. Raveled in words, as a spider is raveled in its silk, I think I should know what to want to say. But to want to say is not what the man, in his use of a figure of a spider, drifting suspended, tethered to a lifeline, spinning out impossibly fine, intends when he says, the deeds to my house are stained with blood. and then shows you the stains. 3 long stains, dried brown and fading above the signature line. And because I know some of you guys were here last time, I don't wish to, when I read it at that other place. You know, the other place. I'm going to read some new poems, which I guess in a way dovetail with what David was talking about, this journalism I've done. It's a sort of a four short poems. What was theirs? 1, a different kind of order. Under the rotors of the helicopters, the city dissolves like bread in water. What was theirs to choose is rendered slag and junk. Bundle after bundle, dumped and abandoned, piles up in the tarmac's glare as the moment goes slow-mo and a father lifts up his squirming daughter into the hands of a bewildered soldier who, obeying a different kind of order, lifts her out of sight behind the blast wall. Pure weightlessness takes over, the girl's face rippling in the shimmer as she looks back at her father's arms outstretched to the absence she now is. 2, the frequency. She says her life has been packed away in a flimsy suitcase, abandoned in a street blown to rubble. A street where her lame little sister died from shrapnel, and she herself had her foot blown off, shrugging when she says, there it was, lying across from me in the street. She says her impulse now is to laugh, not cry, wonders if something serious has gone wrong inside her, says she dreams of her sister bleeding out while she stands by listening to her Twitter feeds non-stop pinging. 2 months later, a crutch under one shoulder, and while all this keeps happening, and before I can run downstairs to help her, I hear her hopping up the stairs, one hard step at a time. It's an echo that never fades, radiating out beyond the atmosphere, on its way beyond our galaxy. The frequency decaying everywhere, but here, in my ear, at least. 3, nest. The precision of a white tail feather, slowly drifting down, calls to account the blurriness of victory, shading the soldier's camo, as up in the plane trees a sparrow's nest, woven from bits of dried grass and shreds of plastic, sways in the branches above the refugees' bodies shawled in tear gas, spreading lazily. The eyes staring out from beneath the helmet's steel rim rush toward a void that the trees make that much emptier, like a dream in which no one is left on earth. And though the nest too is empty, its hollowness keeps rounding into a refuge, an egg-like absent, hugging its own emptiness forever. 4. 5 years ago, shells landing with a muted boom kept me awake in the little barracks room. Soft puffs of smoke rising in the spots, lighting the base's barbed wired perimeter. I'm almost 70. I've seen enough of war. I wake up tired, trying to make the light of my exhaustion the great green go-light of the world. Overhead, a chopper's whop, whop, whop syncs with my own heartbeat pulsing in my ears. Push alerts ping and vibrate in the dark while I lie here, staring at the ceiling, strangely at home with what I used to call fear, and wonder what's crawling vertebrae by vertebrae up my spine. And I think I'll go back to this book. I'm going to read a poem called Words from Chernobyl. And it takes off from the great book by Svetlana Alexievich. The sun beat down on me. Birds were nesting. Graves were being dug. The army gave us gloves, respirators, surgical robes. The sun beat down on us. We were living in this parallel, not Earth world, where the apocalypse met the Stone Age. We were trolls, demons, showing up in people's yards, and our job was to bury everything. Bugs, spiders, worms, all colors, all killed by hundreds, thousands. We rolled them all up in big plastic sheets, not knowing what they were called, these bugs, spiders, worms, destroying their houses, secrets. And we buried them, including the soil we buried in the soil, earth to earth. And that's what I remember most, burying the bugs, spiders, leeches. When they sent me there in spring, birds were nesting. Everything was giving birth. The place was so awful because it was so beautiful. And when they let me leave, radioactive apples glowed against the snow. They told us we had to win, but against what? Physics? The universe? The atom? There's a parable about a guy who lived in Jerusalem, and Christ was staggering right past his home. He watched him collapse under the cross and cry out. He saw all this, but his tooth hurt, so he didn't run outside. And 2 days later, when his tooth stopped hurting, people told him, Christ, Christ has risen. And he thought, I could have been a witness to it, but my tooth hurt. So, is that how it always is? 1 minute, ants are crawling along a branch, the sun beats down on it. It's just your average chaos. And the next it's, why don't you all go fuck yourselves? My dad defended Moscow in 1942. But it was only through books and movies he found too tedious to finish that he realized years later what he'd been through. His own memory of the great event was, I sat in a trench, shot my rifle, got buried by an explosion. They dug me out, half alive. That's it. My dad liked to say that people shoot, but it's God who guides the bullet. And I think I'll read My mother died recently, and so she's in my thoughts. And she died when she was 97, and when she was like 87, I began to write this series of poems, which I've been writing for the last decade, thinking, well, this will be the last year. Well, this will be the last year. And now I have a lot of them because she lived for 10 years, and the whole conceit is that they're written for her birthday. And my mother was a high school English teacher, a really wonderful high school English teacher. If you want to know anything about the indirect object, I can. Anyway, she speaks the first section and the third section, and the poet says it's the second to fourth one. And she loved the Iliad, and you know, her command of details was not great. And so she would call me and ask me questions about, so now, who's this character and what happens now? So anyway. 1. Tom, I'm all scrambled. Now, just who is Thetis? Is she the goddess of the shining thighs? Yesterday, I looked at my thighs, and believe me, they aren't shining. And Patroclus, he's Achilles' boyfriend, right? And he gets himself killed by wearing Achilles' armor. And poor old Hector, he has to stand up for his brother, what's his name, who stole Helen? Paris, that's it, Paris. Help me out here, will you? It's all a bit jumbly in my head. And Trump, did you see what that bastard did today? 2. And when she's half asleep, levitating up near the ceiling, who can stop the pen signing order after order that makes her words stumble? The committee in her right lobe, scrambling every synapse fire, shorting out the wires between her will and brain, her heart beating softer and softer until it fades into tape hiss on the secret reel-to-reel. 3. It doesn't seem right, Tom, that people should be 92. Do you think that's even possible? And this medical buzzer thing that goes off when I fall, when I was a girl, just who the hell thought that such a thing would ever exist? It's almost silly, isn't it, to live like this? You know that book that has the list of all the dead Greek warriors? Not the big shots, but the nobodies. The one you told me about by that English girl. I like that phrase she repeats, and they bit the dust. You can see them as they fall. I like that. No buzzers for them, boy. No regret or fuss. And they bit the dust. 4. Quicksand beneath her house shoes, surveillance satellites above. Among the old dead heroes, she founders on their love. She gave me the picture book where the god eats his child, then vomits him back up. Where the mother holds her boy above the river of forgetfulness, clutching him by the heel, not daring to get her fingers wet, immortal though she is. Just so, Ma, you dangle me head down, teaching me by example, immersion, subversion, in words that wear no armor and won't let me forget. And then I'll probably read 2 more. This poem is called Virtuoso. The woman at 95 who still plays the piano virtuosically. Keys tarnished from long years of her finger pads wearing scallops into the ivory. That woman is trying to replace my mother, shove her out of mind so that only her hands float above the keys. My mother's right hand that played the Moonlight Sonata, now from an old stroke curls on itself, more a paw as it digs a hole for a nut in the ground. Back in the 20s, someone made a movie of the virtuoso playing a Beethoven minuet when she was 5, confessing 90 years later, after she listens to her child self play, my father's ambitions for me as a musician cost me my childhood. Her loss, her skill, her age, her renown, her hand, her weapon wielded against my mother. This woman on the phone, whom I call Ma. Or is it the piano keys taking them both over, death approaching them together, adagio speeding to molto rapido when the virtuoso's hands crash down on a minor third? Can you hear how the piano's been lushing it up all night long, even as the weepiness of dying is exactly what the taut strung wires most hate. The wires that grieve more than any nerve, that feel loss with such fatal intimacy, a fetal closeness that intercedes and pushes me and her apart, while my mother half jokes, when you're old as I am, you run out of reasons to go on living. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The piano knows all about poets writing poems for dying mothers. Wasn't it a poet, some guy named Rellstab, who likened the funeral march of Beethoven's sonata to moonlight rippling on Lake Lucerne? And then I'll finish with this poem. Age of Wonder. It was our age of wonder. And then it was over. Somehow we survived. Now, what else would be expected of us? On the shelf, the scavenged glass bottles polished by the waves, the dregs of medicines and tinctures that cured nobody of anything, but the pain of suspecting nothing could alleviate their pain. That blue that spangled up the wall across the ceiling, and which we woke to clear mornings, shadows of locust trees playing over the covers, that was the moment the empty bottles spilled over. What did I think wonder meant until I met you? And the fact that it could go on and on. My age of wonder assaults me in the mirror. Is this still me lying next to you? Even our peeling wallpaper, finely cross-hatched and crinkling like the skin thinning on the back of my hand, is charged with that blue shattering into prisms faint all across the wall. But it's no rainbow. That isn't the wonder that either of us craved. The rays vibrating never through open, glitzy, sunset-colored doors to some personal heaven we could or couldn't enter. Instead, one or the other of us finally came down from the attic ready to smell the rich, mud-flat dolor of low tide, the subtle sulphurous rot of dead gulls, gutted fish, bleaching salt hay. And as for the age, the wonder is that the age lasted this long. And now that it's over, we can still live, can't we? Inside it's fading, as if it were the future, that year by year we age backward toward. Thanks.